2 years after I divorced my cheating wife, I was in my garage on a Tuesday evening, elbow deep in the engine of my battered Honda Civic, when blue and red lights suddenly painted my driveway like some twisted Christmas display. I wiped my greasy hands on an old rag and stepped outside, squinting against the harsh glare of the police cruiser's headlights. "Are you David Mitchell?" The officer was young, maybe 25, with that eager look cops get when they think they're about to make their career-defining arrest. "That's me. What's this about, officer?" "There's an emergency involving a child left in your car. You're under arrest for child endangerment." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the whole situation was so absurd it felt like I'd stepped into someone else's nightmare. "I don't have a child, officer, unless you count my ex-wife's new boy toy, but he's 34 and should know better than to sit in hot cars." The officer's partner, an older sergeant with tired eyes, stepped forward. "Sir, we need you to come with us. There's a 3-year-old boy in critical condition, and the car is registered to you." That's when the laughter died in my throat. They led me to my old Honda Accord, the one I'd sold to my ex-wife Tara during our divorce settlement 2 years ago. The same car I'd bought her for her birthday 5 years earlier, back when I still believed in happy endings and thought marriage meant something. Through the rear window, I could see a small form slumped in a car seat, paramedics working frantically. "Jesus Christ," I whispered, all the smart-A remarks evaporating from my tongue. The kid was maybe 3 years old, unconscious from the heat, his little face red and sweaty. The paramedics had the doors open, working with oxygen masks and ice packs. It was 92 degrees outside, and the car had been sitting in the sun for God knows how long. "This is your vehicle, correct?" The sergeant showed me the registration. Sure enough, there was my name. David Mitchell, 1247 Maple Street. "I sold this car to my ex-wife 2 years ago. I have the bill of sale at home." My voice sounded strange in my own ears, like I was talking through cotton. "Do you have custody of this child?" "I don't have any children. That kid isn't mine." The officers exchanged glances. The younger one was already reaching for his handcuffs. "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us while we sort this out." The metal bite of the handcuffs was cold against my wrists, and I found myself thinking about how this was exactly the kind of thing Tara would somehow make my fault. Even 2 years after our divorce, even when she was the one who'd cheated, even when she was the one who'd taken everything in the settlement, somehow this would be my problem to solve. "Where is the child's mother?" I asked as they guided me toward the police cruiser. "We're looking for her now." The car was reported by a bystander who saw the child inside unconscious. They called 911 and gave us the license plate number. I sat in the back of that police car, watching the paramedics work on a kid I'd never seen before, in a car I no longer owned, and felt that familiar sensation of being trapped in someone else's mess. It was a feeling I knew well from my marriage to Tara. The radio crackled with updates. They'd found the mother, inside Nordstrom, shopping for clothes, completely oblivious to the fact that she'd left a 3-year-old child in a hot car. The same woman who'd called me irresponsible during our divorce. The same woman who'd told the judge I was unfit to have custody of our dog. 20 minutes later, they brought Tara out in handcuffs. She looked exactly the same as she had 2 years ago. Perfectly styled blonde hair, expensive clothes, that practiced look of innocence she'd perfected during our marriage. The look that said whatever had gone wrong couldn't possibly be her fault. When she saw me in the police car, her eyes went wide with what I initially thought was surprise, but quickly recognized as calculation. Even in handcuffs, even with a child in the hospital because of her negligence, she was already working the angles. "This is David's fault," she announced to anyone within earshot. "He should have transferred the title. I told him to handle the paperwork." And there it was, classic Tara. Turn the sufferer into the villain with one smooth pivot. The sergeant opened my door. "Mr. Mitchell, we're going to need you to come to the station to sort this out." "Am I under arrest?" "We're investigating. We need to understand the situation with the vehicle registration and custody arrangements." I nodded. After 15 years of marriage to Tara, I'd learned to keep detailed records of everything. Call it survival instinct or just good business sense. I'm a risk management consultant, after all. Documentation is what I do for a living. I have all the paperwork at home: bill of sale, text messages about the transfer, divorce decree showing no custody arrangements for any children. Everything you need. The sergeant looked relieved. "We'll need to see all of that." As they drove me to the station, I caught a glimpse of the ambulance pulling away, lights flashing. Some kid I'd never met was fighting for his life because his mother, my ex-wife, had forgotten he existed while she shopped for designer clothes. But somehow, because of a piece of paper in a DMV file, this was going to be my problem to solve. The police station smelled like disinfectant and bad coffee. They put me in an interview room with fluorescent lights that hummed like angry wasps and made everything look slightly green. I'd been here before, actually. Not as a suspect, but as a consultant. I'd helped the department investigate insurance fraud cases back when I thought being helpful to the community mattered. Detective Sarah Chin, no relation to my case, just bad timing, brought me coffee in a paper cup and sat across from me with a thick folder. Mr. Mitchell, we need to understand the timeline here. The vehicle is registered to you, but you claim you sold it to your ex-wife 2 years ago? I don't claim anything. I have documentation. I pulled out my phone. I can call my attorney right now, and he'll bring over copies of everything. Bill of sale, text messages, emails about the transfer. Tara was supposed to handle the DMV paperwork. Why didn't you handle it yourself? Because she insisted on doing it. Said she wanted to maintain some independence. Looking back, I think she just wanted to avoid the registration fees and insurance rate increases. Detective Chen made notes. Tell me about your relationship with the child. I don't have one. I've never seen that kid before today. I don't even know his name. The child is Marcus Brennan, age 3. His father is Marcus Brennan Sr., who works with your ex-wife at Pinnacle Insurance. And there it was. The final piece of the puzzle I'd been avoiding for 2 years. Tara's work husband, Marcus, the guy she'd been having an affair with during our marriage, had knocked her up. The timeline made perfect sense. She'd filed for divorce right around the time she would have found out she was pregnant. So this is her affair partner's kid. We're not here to discuss your marriage, Mr. Mitchell. We're here to discuss child endangerment. Right, the child endangerment that happened because my ex-wife left her boyfriend's kid in a hot car while she went shopping. In a car that's registered to me because she never bothered to transfer the title, probably to save money on registration fees. Detective Chen's expression didn't change, but I could see her taking notes. We'll need to verify your story. It's not a story, it's documentation. I keep records of everything. 2 hours later, my attorney Tom Fitzgerald arrived with a briefcase full of papers that told the whole sad tale. Bill of sale dated 2 years ago. Text messages from Tara saying she'd handled the DMV transfer. Emails about insurance changes. Divorce decree clearly stating no custody arrangements for any children, because we didn't have any children. This is pretty straightforward, Tom told Detective Chen. My client sold the vehicle to his ex-wife as part of their divorce settlement. She was responsible for transferring the title and registration. She failed to do so, probably for financial reasons. The child in question isn't his, and he has no legal relationship to the child whatsoever. Detective Chen reviewed the documents. Mr. Mitchell, you're free to go. We may have follow-up questions, but you're not being charged with anything. As I walked out of the police station, I could see Tara through the window of another interview room, gesticulating wildly at another detective. Even from a distance, even through glass, I could tell she was in full sufferer mode, explaining how none of this was her fault. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. Saw the police at your house. Everything okay? Within an hour, it would be all over the neighborhood Facebook group. By morning, everyone would know that David Mitchell had been arrested for child endangerment. The truth would take much longer to spread, if it ever did at all. I drove home in my Honda Civic past the spot where the ambulance had been parked, and thought about how Tara had managed to make her negligence my problem, even 2 years after our divorce. Some people have a gift for chaos. My ex-wife had a PhD in it. The next morning brought a knock on my door at 7 a.m. Child Protective Services with a clipboard and a grim expression. Mr. Mitchell, I'm Janet Rodriguez from CPS. We need to discuss yesterday's incident involving Marcus Brennan. I invited her in, offered coffee, and spread out the same documents I'd shown the police. Janet was thorough, professional, and clearly skeptical of everyone involved in this mess. So you have no relationship with this child? None whatsoever. I didn't even know he existed until yesterday. And the vehicle registration? My ex-wife was supposed to handle the transfer. Here's the bill of sale. Here are the text messages where she confirms she'll take care of the paperwork. Janet made careful notes. Mr. Mitchell, I have to ask, why didn't you follow up to make sure the title was transferred? It was a fair question and one I'd been asking myself since yesterday. Honestly, I was just glad to be done with the whole divorce. Tara had a way of turning every interaction into a battle, and I was exhausted. I figured if there were any problems with registration or insurance, they'd be her problems to solve. That was a mistake. Yeah, I'm getting that impression. Janet's investigation was thorough. She interviewed neighbors, reviewed my work schedule, checked my background for any history with children or child welfare issues. She found exactly what I expected her to find. Nothing. I'm a risk management consultant. I work with insurance companies to investigate suspicious claims and assess liability exposure. My days are spent in offices and courtrooms, not playgrounds. I don't have kids, don't work with kids, don't particularly enjoy being around kids. It's not that I dislike them, they just exist in a world I'm not part of. The child is stable, Janet told me during her second visit. He's going to recover fully, but this incident has raised serious questions about the home environment. What kind of questions? This isn't the first time Marcus has been left unattended. We've had reports from his daycare about missed pickups, about him being dropped off in soiled clothes, about his mother seeming distracted or impaired during drop-offs. I wasn't surprised. During our marriage, Tara had trouble keeping track of her dry cleaning, let alone anything that required consistent attention and care. Where's his father in all this? Marcus Brennan Sr. works long hours in sales. He travels frequently. According to his statement, he wasn't aware of any problems with childcare arrangements. So Tara's been handling everything, apparently. That explained a lot. Tara was great at managing her image, terrible at managing actual responsibilities. During our marriage, I'd handled all the household logistics, bills, maintenance, scheduling, planning. She'd focused on her career and her appearance. It had worked in a dysfunctional way until she decided she wanted someone more exciting than a guy who remembered to pay the electric bill on time. What happens now? The child has been placed in temporary custody with his father. Ms. Mitchell, your ex-wife, will have supervised visitation only until we complete our investigation. And the criminal charges? That's up to the district attorney's office. Child endangerment is a serious charge. 3 days later, the story hit the local news. Not the real story. That would have required actual journalism. Instead, they ran with local man arrested in child endangerment case, complete with a photo of me being led away in handcuffs. My phone started ringing immediately. Friends, coworkers, clients, all wanting to know what the hell was going on. I spent the morning explaining the same story over and over. Not my kid, not my car anymore, not my fault. Most people understood once they heard the details. But some didn't, and some didn't want to. There's a certain type of person who enjoys other people's misfortune, who assumes that where there's smoke, there must be fire. My boss called me into his office that afternoon. David, we need to talk about this situation. It's handled, Jim. I was cleared of any wrongdoing. I have documentation. I know that. But we have clients who are asking questions. We work with families, with children's organizations. This kind of publicity is the result of my ex-wife's negligence and the media's laziness. I didn't do anything wrong. I believe you, but perception matters in our business. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe you should take some time off until this blows over. Forced leave. Not fired, not suspended, just removed from the equation until the embarrassment faded. It was the corporate equivalent of being sent to your room to think about what you'd done, even though what I'd done was get divorced from someone who turned out to be an even worse person than I'd realized. I spent the next week at home, watching the story develop from a distance. Tara hired a lawyer, an expensive one, based on the suits and the BMW parked outside the courthouse. She gave interviews to anyone who would listen, explaining how this was all a misunderstanding, how she was being persecuted for being a single mother, how her ex-husband should have handled the paperwork properly. She was good at it. She'd always been good at controlling narratives, at making herself the sufferer of other people's failures. It was one of the things that had attracted me to her initially, and her confidence, her ability to command a room. It had taken me years to realize that confidence was often just well-packaged selfishness. Marcus Brennan Sr., meanwhile, had quietly moved out of state with his son. No interviews, no statements, just a U-Haul truck in the driveway one day and an empty apartment the next. Smart man. He'd figured out what it had taken me 15 years to learn. Sometimes the best way to deal with Tara is to put as much distance between yourself and her as possible. The CPS investigation concluded exactly as I'd expected. Tara lost primary custody. Marcus got full custody and a restraining order. The child was safe, the father was responsible, and the mother was left with supervised visitation rights that she'd probably violate within 6 months. But my name was still on every news report. My face was still associated with child endangerment. My neighbors still looked at me sideways when I checked the mail. That's when I decided it was time to stop being the sufferer of Tara's chaos and start being the author of my own story. My attorney, Tom Fitzgerald, had been handling divorces and family law for 20 years. He was expensive, thorough, and had no patience for people who wasted his time. When I called him about filing a lawsuit against Tara, he was immediately interested. Defamation, emotional distress, fraudulent use of your vehicle registration, he mused, making notes. This is actually a pretty strong case. She caused you to be falsely arrested, damaged your reputation, and used your legal identity for her own purposes for 2 years. What kind of damages are we talking about? Hard to say. Lost wages from the forced leave, damage to your professional reputation, emotional distress from the false arrest. Could be substantial. I don't want substantial, I want specific. Tom looked up from his legal pad. What do you mean? Tara inherited $85,000 from her grandmother last year. It's sitting in a savings account at First National. I want exactly that amount. That's oddly precise. It's justice. She used my identity, my reputation, my legal standing to cover her own negligence. That inheritance represents the only money she has that didn't come from our marriage or her affair with Marcus. It's the only thing that's purely hers. Tom smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. I like the way you think. The lawsuit was filed on a Friday afternoon, timed perfectly to hit Tara's weekend. Tom was strategic about these things. Serve papers when people are relaxed, when they're not expecting legal trouble, when they're most likely to make emotional decisions. Tara's response was exactly what I'd expected. She called me 17 times in 2 hours, leaving increasingly hysterical voicemails about how I was trying to destroy her life, how I was being vindictive, how I should just move on and let her be happy. I didn't answer any of the calls. Instead, I forwarded them all to Tom, who used them as evidence of maltreatment in our motion for a restraining order. This woman, Tom said, listening to the voicemails, has a real talent for self-destruction. The restraining order was granted within a week. No contact, no communication except through attorneys, no coming within 500 feet of my home or workplace. It was the first peace I'd had from Tara in 3 years. But the real satisfaction came from the discovery process. As part of the lawsuit, we were entitled to examine Tara's financial records, her communications, her employment history. What we found was a pattern of negligence and deception that went far beyond leaving a child in a hot car. Bank records showed she'd been using my vehicle registration to avoid paying higher insurance rates for 2 years. She'd listed me as the primary driver on her insurance policy, even after our divorce, to get lower premiums. She'd used my address for vehicle registration renewals, forging my signature on DMV documents. Her employment records were even more interesting. 3 complaints from clients about missed appointments. 2 warnings about inappropriate relationships with coworkers. A formal reprimand for using company resources for personal business. And then there were the text messages. Tara had been sloppy about digital security during our marriage, and apparently that hadn't changed. Her phone backed up to an iCloud account that she'd shared with me years earlier and never bothered to change. Tom's investigator was able to access 2 years of text messages between Tara and Marcus, between Tara and her friends, between Tara and her mother. The messages painted a picture of someone who viewed other people as tools for her own convenience. She'd complained about Marcus being boring and too focused on his kid. She'd discussed strategies for getting more money out of me during the divorce. She'd laughed about how I was too stupid to realize she was using my vehicle registration to save money. But the most damaging messages were about little Marcus, her boyfriend's son. God, this kid is exhausting, she'd texted her friend Lisa. I didn't sign up to be a mom. Maybe just leave him with his dad more, Lisa had replied. Marcus works all the time. I'm stuck with babysitting duty. It's not babysitting if you're living with them. Whatever. I need a break. Going shopping. Kid can stay in the car for a few minutes. The timestamp on that message was from the day of the incident. She'd planned to leave the child in the car. It wasn't an accident or a moment of forgetfulness. It was a deliberate decision to prioritize her shopping over a 3-year-old's safety. Tom filed an amended complaint that included fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and criminal conspiracy. We sent copies of the text messages to the district attorney's office, to Child Protective Services, and to Tara's employer. The response was swift and devastating. The DA filed additional charges against Tara, not just child endangerment, but fraud related to the vehicle registration and insurance documents. CPS revoked her visitation rights entirely. Her employer, Pinnacle Insurance, fired her for conduct inconsistent with company values. Within 2 weeks, Tara had lost her job, her access to her boyfriend's child, and her legal standing in our lawsuit. Her expensive attorney withdrew from the case, citing irreconcilable differences with his client. Lawyers speak for, "She can't pay my bills and she won't stop lying to me." The settlement conference was held on a rainy Thursday morning in Tom's office. Tara showed up with a court-appointed attorney who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. She'd lost weight, her hair was unwashed, and she had the hollow-eyed look of someone who'd finally run out of other people to blame for her problems. "My client is prepared to offer $10,000 to settle this matter," her attorney began. Tom didn't even look up from his papers. $85,000, the full amount of her inheritance. That's completely unreasonable. Your client used my client's identity for fraud, caused his false arrest, damaged his professional reputation, and endangered a child's life. $85,000 is a bargain. Tara leaned forward. "David, please. You know I don't have that kind of money." I looked at her for the first time since she'd walked into the room. "You have exactly that kind of money. It's sitting in your savings account at First National Bank. Account number ending in 7743. Current balance as of yesterday, $87,412. Her face went white. "How do you know that?" "Discovery. You should read the documents your attorney files on your behalf." The settlement was signed that afternoon. $85,000 paid in full within 30 days. In exchange, I agreed to drop the lawsuit and not pursue any additional claims related to the vehicle registration fraud. As Tara and her attorney left the office, she turned back to look at me one more time. "I hope you're happy," she said. "I'm satisfied," I replied. "There's a difference." 6 months later, I was back at work, my reputation restored, my legal troubles resolved. The forced leave had actually been a blessing in disguise. I'd used the time to pursue additional certifications and had returned to the office with new skills and a broader client base. The local news had eventually run a follow-up story about the case, focusing on the fraud charges and the settlement. It wasn't front-page news, but it was enough to set the record straight for anyone who cared about the truth. Tara had moved back in with her mother in another state. According to mutual friends, she was working at a retail store and struggling to pay her legal bills. Marcus Brennan had remarried and was raising his son in a stable, loving home. The child was thriving. I'd used part of the settlement money to take a vacation, my first real vacation in 5 years. I'd spent 2 weeks in Colorado, hiking and fishing and remembering what it felt like to wake up without someone else's crisis demanding my immediate attention. But the real satisfaction wasn't financial or professional. It was the knowledge that I'd finally learned to fight back against the chaos that had defined my marriage and my divorce. For 15 years, I'd been the responsible one, the one who cleaned up messes and solved problems and made excuses for Tara's behavior. I'd enabled her selfishness by being endlessly accommodating, endlessly forgiving, endlessly willing to absorb the consequences of her actions. The child endangerment case had been different. For the first time, I'd refused to be the sufferer of her negligence. I documented everything, fought back strategically, and held her accountable for the damage she'd caused. It felt good. It felt like justice. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, stopped by one evening with a casserole and an apology. "I'm sorry I believed those initial news reports," she said. "I should have known you better than that." "It's okay. The truth came out eventually. That ex-wife of yours really did a number on you, didn't she?" I thought about that for a moment. She tried to, but in the end, she did a number on herself. The final piece of the story came in the mail 6 months later. A thank you card from Marcus Brennan Sr., written in a child's handwriting with help from his father. "Thank you for helping keep me safe," it read. Daddy says you're a good man. I put the card on my refrigerator next to a photo of my Colorado vacation and a copy of the news article that had finally told the truth about what happened that day in my driveway. Some stories don't have happy endings. Some stories just have endings where the right people win and the wrong people face consequences for their actions. This was one of those stories. Tara had spent our entire marriage making her problems my problems, making her failures my responsibility, making her chaos my burden to carry. The child endangerment case had been her final attempt to drag me into her dysfunction, to make me the scapegoat for her negligence. But this time, I'd been ready. This time, I'd had documentation and legal representation and the will to fight back. This time, the person who caused the problem was the person who paid the price for it. It had taken me 42 years to learn that lesson, but it was worth learning. I never saw Tara again. I never spoke to her again. I never had to clean up another one of her messes or make another excuse for her behavior or wonder what crisis she'd create next. Some endings are just endings. And sometimes that's exactly what you need. A year after the settlement, I received a phone call that put everything into perspective. Mr. Mitchell, this is Detective Sarah Chen. We met during the child endangerment investigation. I remember. What can I do for you? I wanted to let you know that we've completed our investigation into the broader pattern of fraud related to your case. Your ex-wife has been charged with multiple counts of identity theft, insurance fraud, and document forgery. How many counts? 17, spanning 2 years. She'd been using your information for more than just the vehicle registration. Credit applications, insurance policies, even a lease agreement for an apartment she couldn't afford on her own. I sat down hard in my kitchen chair. 17 counts? She'd been using your credit rating, your employment history, and your legal identity to qualify for financial products and services. When those accounts went into default, or when claims were filed, the liability traced back to you. But I never saw any of this on my credit report. She was intercepting mail at your old shared address, which she'd never updated with the post office. She'd been managing the accounts just well enough to keep them from going into collections, but using your identity to get better rates and terms. The scope of the deception was staggering. For 2 years after our divorce, Tara had essentially been living as me whenever it was financially convenient. She'd taken out a credit card in my name to pay for her affair with Marcus. She'd used my employment information to qualify for an apartment lease, then defaulted on the rent. She'd filed insurance claims on policies I'd never seen for property I'd never owned. The child endangerment incident was actually what broke the case open, Detective Chen continued. When we started investigating the vehicle registration discrepancy, we found all the other fraudulent documents. Your lawsuit provided additional evidence that helped us build the criminal case. What's the potential sentence? With 17 counts of fraud and identity theft, she's looking at significant prison time. Her attorney is trying to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA's office isn't interested in being lenient. And the financial damage? We estimate she cost you approximately $40,000 in fraudulent charges, inflated insurance rates, and damaged credit. The good news is that you're entitled to restitution as part of any criminal sentence. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, thinking about the woman I'd been married to for 15 years. I'd known she was selfish, manipulative, and irresponsible. I'd known she was capable of lying and cheating and blaming other people for her mistakes. But I'd never imagined she was capable of systematically stealing my identity for 2 years, of building an entire financial life based on fraudulent use of my legal standing. The child endangerment case hadn't been an isolated incident of negligence. It had been part of a much larger pattern of criminal behavior. 6 months later, Tara pled guilty to 12 counts of fraud and identity theft. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution. Her parole conditions included a permanent restraining order and a prohibition on using my name or personal information for any purpose. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the case, focusing on the sophisticated nature of the identity theft and the importance of monitoring credit reports after divorce. My name was mentioned as the sufferer, not the suspect. My employer gave me a commendation for my handling of the situation and offered me a promotion to senior risk management consultant. My neighbors apologized for their initial suspicions and invited me to block parties and barbecues. My credit rating, once the fraudulent accounts were removed, actually improved. But The real vindication came from an unexpected source. Marcus Brennan Sr. called me on a Sunday evening. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Marcus Brennan. We've never met, but I know who you are. How's your son?" "He's great. He's 4 now, happy and healthy. He doesn't remember any of what happened, which is a blessing." "I'm glad to hear that. I wanted to thank you, and I wanted to apologize." "You don't have anything to apologize for." "I do, actually. I knew Tara was difficult. I knew she had problems with responsibility and truthfulness. But I was so caught up in the affair, in the excitement of it all, that I ignored the red flags. I let her take care of my son when I should have known better. You couldn't have predicted she'd leave him in a hot car. Maybe not that specifically. But I could have predicted that she'd put her own convenience ahead of his safety. The signs were all there. We talked for another 20 minutes. Marcus told me about his new wife, about his son's progress in preschool, about the therapy they'd all gone through to deal with the trauma of that day. He told me about the nightmares his son had experienced and about the guilt he felt for trusting Tara with the most important thing in his life. "The thing is," he said before we hung up, "I understand now why you divorced her. I understand why you fought back the way you did. She has this way of making you feel like you're the problem, like you're the one who's being unreasonable, even when she's the one causing all the chaos. It took me 15 years to figure that out. It took me almost losing my son." After the call, I walked out to my garage and looked at my Honda Civic, the car I'd kept, the car that had never been involved in fraud or negligence or identity theft. It was 10 years old now, with 150,000 miles on it, but it was mine, completely, legally, unambiguously mine. I thought about the Honda Accord, the one I'd sold to Tara, the one that had started this whole mess. It had been impounded as evidence during the criminal investigation and eventually sold at auction. The proceeds went to pay part of Tara's restitution debt. Some people leave their mark on the world through creation, through building something lasting and meaningful. Tara had left her mark through destruction, through a trail of damaged relationships and fraudulent documents and traumatized children. But in the end, the destruction had been mostly self-inflicted. Every lie she'd told, every document she'd forged, every time she'd used my identity for her own purposes, she'd been building the case against herself. The evidence that convicted her had come from her own actions, her own choices, her own criminal behavior. I'd just been smart enough to document it all and strong enough to fight back when it mattered. 3 years later, I got a letter from the state parole board informing me that Tara was eligible for early release and asking if I wanted to make a statement about her suitability for parole. I wrote a single paragraph. The defendant systematically defrauded me for 2 years after our divorce, endangered a child through her negligence, and attempted to make me legally responsible for her criminal behavior. She has shown no genuine remorse for her actions and has never taken responsibility for the damage she caused to multiple sufferers. I believe she remains a threat to public safety and should serve her full sentence. The parole was denied. 6 months after that, I received a final piece of mail related to Tara. It was a check from the state restitution office for the full amount of my financial damages plus interest. $43,712. I deposited the check and used the money to make a down payment on a new house in a different neighborhood where no one knew about my ex-wife or the child endangerment case or any of the chaos that had defined my life for so many years. The house had a 2-car garage, a fenced yard, and neighbors who minded their own business. It was everything I'd wanted during my marriage and everything I'd been able to achieve after my divorce. On moving day, as I loaded the last box into my Honda Civic, Mrs. Patterson came over to say goodbye. "I'm going to miss having you as a neighbor," she said. "You're one of the good ones." "Thank you. That means a lot. I hope you find happiness in your new place." I looked at my old house, at the driveway where police cars had once been parked, at the garage where I'd been working on my car when this whole story began. "I already have," I said, and I meant it.